talked about Julien Fedon. So Julien Fedon was a free mulatto. Mulatto meaning he was half black. His father was white, a Frenchman, and his mother was black, a former slave from Martinique. So Julien Fedon was the leader of the Fedon's rebellion. He was an estate owner. He owned the Belvidere estate located in St. John's, and he had about 100 slaves on the Belvidere estate. And he came to Grenada as a young and grew his life in Grenada. He married and had two children, two daughters to be exact. So that was who Julien Fedon was. He was the leader of the Fedon Rebellion. So today we're going to continue looking at the Fedon's Rebellion and talk more about Fedon rebellions. Let me just okay. So last week we talked a little bit about Fedon's camp. So Fedon's camp is located in the parish of St. John's, and this is just a map to show exactly where it's in. It's borderline between the St. John's parish and the St. Andrew's parish. It's located north of Mount Kwakwa. So any one of you who've been hiking up to Mount Kwakwa, just north of Mount Kwakwa, further up is Fedon's camp, and Fedon's camp was the camp of Fedon, Julien Fedon, and those who were fighting with him during the period of the Fedon's rebellion. Hostages were taken, British hostages. At the time, Grenada was a British colony. There were French colonists living in Grenada, people who are French origin, either they were born in France or born in French speaking islands such as Martinique and Guadeloupe and living in Grenada. So Julien Fedon was a French colonist. He had been born in Martinique, so he was French and living in Grenada. So there were two sets of people living in Grenada: the British people who were either born in Grenada or they came from Britain and were residing in Grenada. So they were the British colonists, and there were also the French colonists, people who were either came from France directly or from the neighboring French-speaking islands of Martinique and Guadeloupe and were living in Grenada. So Fedon's camp was the location or the campsite for Julien Fedon and those who were supporting him in the rebellion. So those included both a mixture of slaves as well as free men, other mulattoes like Julien Fedon who were free and were fed up with the unequal conditions under which they had to live in Grenada. They didn't have equal rights to, as the British colonists. So those people were also supporting Julien Fedon. So there was this campsite set up in the mountains, Fedon's camp, and that was the location of the campsite where all the forces who were fighting with Julien Fedon, they were located. They kept camp. They had all their food supplies there, their ammunition, everything like that. British hostages that were taken either from the Grenville area or the Guave area were brought to Fedon's camp. So many of them were executed at Fedon's camp. Others were just kept hostages and eventually let go. But the majority of them were executed there at Fedon's camp. Today, if you make that hiking trip up to Mount Kwakwa and go up to Fedon's camp, there's a monument that was erected in the 1970s. I have a picture later on to show you. You'll see that monument there that it's at the very summit of the Fedon's camp. Right, so Fedon's camp was a very important part of the Fedon's rebellion, and one of the reasons why the Fedon's rebellion was so successful. Fedon had a dedicated camp in the mountains where he was able to mobilize forces and mobilize um, those who were fighting with him to attack the British troops and the British colonists that were um, also fighting against Julien Fedon. So that was the signature site, the Fedon's camp. So let's take in a view of what the camp actually looks like. So give me one moment. Let me just share another screen. And we could see a look of Fedon's camp. Right. Just want to ensure that I'm showing. So let's take it in. So this is a Fedon's camp. So located to the very north of the island is the Fedon's camp. Not the very north of the island, but north of Mount Kwakwa. So it's about 2,500 feet. That's how high is the location of the Fedon's camp. Today it's mostly like just bush, green, forested areas. No real evidence of the camp exists today, but in that location there in the northern peak of the island of Grenada is the Fedon's camp. Our Fedon's camp was located in 1795. And if you're hiking and you like to hike, you can get it from you have to go past Mount Kwakwa and make the hike up to Fedon's camp, right? So it's a couple hours to do the hike um, to reach Fedon's camp. Right. So that's a fed on scam. So those who are adventurous and want to actually see it in real life, you can schedule a hiking tour with any one of the tours. People who do tours and they can take you up to Fed on scam, and you can see what it looks like in real life or in real time, right? So that's the Fedon's camp. As I say, today there is no real existence of the actual camp. The whole area has been overgrown now with forested areas, trees, bush, etc. But you could definitely go out and check it out. So that was the Fedon's camp. Let's go back to our presentation here. So Fedon's camp, it is believed that in 1795, between 1795 to 1796, because the Fedon's rebellion really lasted 1 year, like 1 year and like 3 months. It ended in June 1796. That the population of the Fedon's camp reached as much as 7,200 people were residing at Fedon's camp, including both slaves and whites. So it was estimated to be about as much as 6,000 slaves took up refuge at Fedon's camp as part of Julien Fedon's army to fight the British forces during Fedon rebellion, as well as about 400 plus whites who were residing on the island who also was siding with Julien Fedon and his cause under the Fedon's rebellion. So that's the estimate of the population of Fedon's camp from 1795 to 1796. It was a campsite, so the campsite had food as well as ammunition. So the slaves, in terms of ammunition, the slaves had like cutlasses and pikes, which they used to defend their position against the British, and the whites had muskets, and there was also ammunition brought in from French neighboring islands such as Martinique, especially, um, to increase the strength of the forces under Julien Fedon. So the picture here, this is the monument. So today, if you go to hike, go up to that hike at Fedon's camp. This would be the monument that you will find at the very summit of Fedon's camp. And it says site of Fedon's camp 1795. So that's the monument that you'll find located at the very summit or peak of Fedon's camp. Um, it was installed, as I said, in the 1790s to mark the location of Fedon's camp. Otherwise, as I said, it's overgrown by trees and bush, and you wouldn't recognize it easily. But the monument there is a good landmark in terms of where the site is believed to have been in 1795 and the expansive area. Fedon, Julien Fedon, he was able to maintain the campsite for the duration of Fedon's rebellion, um, ensuring there was a supply of provisions, especially food and ammunition, to keep the campsite going because it was the base of those of the troops, the slaves and the whites who were fighting. With Julian against the British forces. So the camp had to be maintained, and ensuring food, of course, was important. So just a quick plug again, ensure that you're following us on Facebook. If you are viewing by another streaming platform, um, check out our Facebook page, Island Learning Grenada, and follow our page or like our page. You can do both. You can like the page as well as you can follow the page, Island Learning Grenada, and stay connected to all that we post on our Facebook page by following us on Island Learning Grenada. So who was supporting Fedon? So Fedon had some associates who were supporting him. So there were these five gentlemen who were part of the leadership team, for lack of better words. Um, Under Julian Fedon. So we had Charles Nogue. He was a tailor by profession, and he joined Julian Fedon in the Fedon's rebellion. We had Joachim Philip. He was like Julian Fedon. He was a free mulatto. He was also a landowner and owned a coffee estate. So Joachim Philip, He was the one mainly responsible for gathering of the forces in the Guave St. John's area. So on the night of March 2nd, 1795, two attacks were launched, one in Grenville and one in Guave. The one in Guave was led by Joachim Philip. Um, as part of the start of the Fedon's Rebellion of 1795. We had Stanislas Besson. He was a silversmith by profession. We had John Fedon. John Fedon was the brother of Julien Fedon. He was also a coffee estate owner. He owned a small coffee estate. And lastly, we had John Pierre Lavalette. He was a tailor from Surtees in St. Patrick's. So those were the five gentlemen who were the associates or the colleagues of Julien Fedon and helped Julien in the execution of the Fedon's Rebellion of 1795. Initial success. So the rebellion broke out on the night of March 2nd, 1795. By the morning of March 3rd, 1795, two major towns had been taken by siege, both Grenville and Guave. They were taken over by Julian Fedon's forces, and that began the start of the Fedon's Rebellion. That rebellion will last until June 1796, so just about a year and 3 months that rebellion lasted. So the initial success. So the initial success of the Fedon's rebellion was mainly driven by three reasons or three factors. One, weak British forces. So the British forces at the time were very weak. The British did not have a large number of troops on island at the time when the rebellion broke out. So they had a weak command to begin with. And then during that period of a year, the island of Grenada was plagued by a yellow fever. So yellow fever is now extinct. I don't think it has been centuries since there has been a breakout of yellow fever. But in the 1700s and even in the 1800s, yellow fever was a sickness or illness that plagued many of the persons who came from Europe um, and lived in Grenada. So it affected those who lived in Grenada, so those, even the slaves, those who were freed after 1838, and definitely the British and French colonists living in Grenada were affected by yellow fever. So in 1795 to 1796, the British forces were affected a lot by yellow fever. Many of them died um, because of yellow fever. So they had a weak force to be able to combat and fight against Julian Fedon forces. Remember, he had about 6,000 slaves fighting for him. There are another almost 400 plus whites, then a few hundred free mulattoes, right? So in total, almost close to an army of 7,000 forces, right? So it was a big group, and the British did not have that manpower to be able to combat and beat Fedon's forces. And especially they were weakened by the presence of the yellow fever, which many of them died from. So that's the first reason why Julian Fedon was successful on the onset. There was a weak British presence on island, and this allowed him to gain lots of traction before the British could recoup and get reinforcements to be able to get hold of what was taking place in Grenada. Shortage of food. So food supply was very short. Um, Julien Fedon was able, because he owned a estate, and some of the colleagues that he had, such as his brother John Fedon and also Joachim Philip, they also owned estates. They managed to be able to keep their food supply so they could continue to feed the slaves, the whites, and the free mulattoes who were fighting under their troops or their forces. The British, on the other hand, they suffered immensely from shortage of food. They couldn't get food into the island, and many of the British troops died because they were unable to get enough food to keep them going. So the food shortage on the island impacted the British forces a lot more than Julian Fedon's forces, who were able to get resources from, planting and the farming on their own estates to be able to keep them going. And the third reason for the initial success of the Fedon's rebellion, it was driven by the killing of the lieutenant governor. So a lieutenant governor was the position. Today we have the governor general, but before independence, the British head of state represented in Grenada was called the lieutenant governor. So the lieutenant governor at the time during the Fedon's rebellion in 1795 was a gentleman by the name of Ninian Home. So he was appointed governor in 1793. He was appointed governor by the British monarch at the time. So that document that's showing on the screen is not very clear. It's actually the appointment document that states out that Ninian Home is appointed lieutenant governor of Grenada in 1795. He had been living in Grenada since 1762. So he did not just come to Grenada as governor, he was actually living in Grenada. He was the owner of two estates. He had one estate in Waltham in St. Max and another estate located in Paraclete in St. Andrews. So he was also an estate owner, owning two estates in Grenada. So in 1795, when the Fedon's rebellion broke out, he was captured. He was captured by the forces in Guelph, led by Joachim Philip, one of the colleagues of Julien Fedon. He was captured. So one of the earliest moves that Julien Fedon made was to capture the lieutenant governor of Grenada at the time. A very bold move, of course, to in the beginning of a rebellion to capture the leader of the country, although not uncommon though. I mean, it definitely was a good move to capture the leader at the time. So um, Joachim Philip and the troops in Guelph captured Ninian Home, whose home was located actually in the parish of St. John's. So that's where he was located. His house and residence was in Guelph St. John's. So he was captured by those forces, Fedon's forces in Guelph in 1795. It is alleged or believed that he was held as a hostage from March to April 8, 1795 at the Fedon's camp, right? So he was held as an hostage at Fedon's camp for just over a month and then was executed on April 8, 1795. So the execution of the governor, the lieutenant governor of Grenada, uh, Governor Ninian Home in 1795 also contributed to the initial success of the Fedon's rebellion. So let's take a quick break, a quick commercial break, and then we'll continue with the rest of Fedon's rebellion. And we are back. We are back. So for those who are watching the program again, this is just a plug to follow us on Facebook at Island Learning Grenada. You can like our Facebook page. You can also hit the follow button on our Facebook page. If you are watching via YouTube, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Island Learning Grenada, to stay updated to all our content posted on our YouTube channel. So let's continue looking at the Fedon's rebellion. So what really led to the demise of the rebellion? So the rebellion kicked off awesome start March 3rd, 1795, but it did not last. The rebellion did not last, and on June 19th, 1796, the rebellion came to an unfortunate end and dissipated or ended. So, what really contributed to the demise of the Fedon's rebellion? So, one of the reasons for the demise of the Fedon's rebellion was the fall of strongholds. As I mentioned, initially the British, they were very weak. They did not have a large number of forces on island, and many of the troops suffered from yellow fever, but that did not last over the months and definitely beginning from March 1796, reinforcements came from Britain itself as well as other neighboring British colonies in the Caribbean to support the forces in Grenada under the British forces that were fighting Julien Fedon and his forces. So reinforcements came on island and that strengthened the British forces. Once the reinforcements arrived, they began attacking strongholds held by Julien Fedon. And one of those strongholds were located in the parish of St. Andrews, Post Royal, which is a community in today is a community in the parish of St. Andrews, but this was one of Fedon's strongest strongholds during the Fedon's rebellion, and the British attacked that stronghold and managed to take control of that stronghold in March 1796. So once strongholds began falling one by one, beginning with Post Royal, and there was another one, Piton Hill, was another stronghold that was taken. That began to weaken Julian Fedon's efforts under the Fedon's rebellion. And that's what would be one of the factors that contributed to the eventual demise of Fedon's rebellion. So the end of the rebellion ended in June 1796, just about 1 year and 3 months after he had started. So the rebellion, sorry, ended. Very unfortunate, very bloody end. So the final attack that the British troops made, now they were, revamped forces. Um, they attacked um Fedon's camp. Fedon's camp, as I said, was the location or the camp of Julian Fedon. This was his station point for food, ammunition, and where many of the troops were camping, including the slaves, including the whites, including the free mulattoes who were fighting with Julian Fedon. So the last moves that the British forces made was to attack Fedon's camp. It was a bloody end to the Fedon's rebellion. Many, many, many slaves died on that last attack at Fedon's camp when the British troops attacked Fedon's camp and basically killed those who were there mercilessly. Julian Fedon himself managed to escape, so he escaped from Fedon's camp, and he has never been found. His body has never been found. There has been stories about, oh, he escaped and took a boat and went to Trinidad and later would have died in Trinidad. Others said he escaped and took a boat and went to Martinique, because that was where he was believed to have been born in Martinique, before his parents moved to Grenada. So it is believed that he took a boat and he went to Martinique and later would have died in Martinique, just with normal age and so forth, died, but he would have escaped the Fedon's rebellion. Others believe that he died during the rebellion itself. He succumbed to the troops and he was killed as part of the attack of 1796, when the attack was made on Fedon's camp. So there are three possible theories still circulating today in terms of what became of Julien Fedon, right? So that is still a piece of the story that needs to be figured out and told, whether or not in years to come archaeologists will be able to discover the bones of Julien Fedon. Maybe that is a possibility still, with the, you know each year the science of archaeology is improving. That is a possibility, if indeed he did succumb um to the attack um at Fedon's camp. Then his remains are somewhere probably in the Fedon's camp region, and that would require some archaeology mission to be able to discover those. So that was the end. The end of the Fedon's rebellion was on June 19, 1796, with an attack made on Fedon's camp, in which Fedon's troops, which were the slaves and the free mulattoes and the whites who were fighting, many of them were killed, and that ended the Fedon's rebellion. And lastly, the Fedon's rebellion, the impact of the rebellion. So Julian Fedon, his vision was that he wanted to create an independent Black republic, in which persons of both French and British origin or citizenship would be able to live in Grenada and have equal rights. That was his vision, similar to what Toussaint Louverture would do a few years later on with the Haitian Revolution in Haiti. Unfortunately, the Fedon's rebellion did not succeed, and it did not result in the end being a drive, or the mission wasn't achieved. The mission of creating that free, independent Black Republic for Grenada was not achieved. We would have to wait until 1974 to become an independent nation, um, away from British rule. But the Fedon's rebellion was not successful. The impact of the rebellion, it had a devastating impact on the economy of Grenada at the time in 1796, mainly because during that year period and leading up to the end of the rebellion, there was just so many destruction of coffee and cocoa estates on island. So it really depleted agriculture and farming, and that sector in Grenada. So 65 sugar estates were destroyed. Many of them were burnt to the ground. And that was part of the fighting between the Julian Fedon's troops and the British troops. So it is believed 65 sugar estates and 35 not cocoa, 35 coffee estates, because sugar and coffee were the two main estates at the time, and cotton to a bit, but cotton more on the sister isles of Carriacou and Petit Martinique. So 65 sugar estates and 35 coffee estates were destroyed during the rebellion. So it definitely devastated a lot the agriculture sector of Grenada, and it's estimated about 7,000 slaves died during the rebellion. The cost figure of damage is estimated to be 2.5 billion sterling pounds. That was the figure that was given in 1795, that the total sum of damage was 2.5 million sterling pounds. The sterling pound at the time was the currency because we were a British colony, so we had the pound was the currency used at the time. So that was the estimate of the damage or the impact of the Fedon's rebellion. So it will take many of the sugar estates did not come back after the Fedon's rebellion. They were destroyed and they no longer existed. Same as the coffee estates. In fact, the coffee or the growing of coffee demised significantly after the 1795 period. As a result of the impact of the Fedon's rebellion. So that's our program today in terms of the learning shared on Fedon's rebellion. We're gonna take a quick break and then wrap up. Uh, so let's take a quick break and then we'll be right back.